The silence in that restaurant was deafening. Every pair of eyes at our family table stared at me like I was some kind of charity case. My brother Marcus had just announced to everyone, including his new fiancée's wealthy parents, that I was the family disappointment, who couldn't even afford to split the bill. "Don't worry about Raina," he said, with that condescending smile I'd grown to hate. "She's been struggling since she left the military. Some people just can't adapt to civilian life, you know?" The way he said it, like I was broken, like my 8 years of service meant nothing, like the uniform I'd worn with pride was just a costume I'd outgrown. But what Marcus didn't know, what none of them knew, was that in exactly 48 hours, I would be standing in the boardroom of First National Bank, not as a borrower, not as someone begging for a loan, but as their newest silent partner. The woman they thought was washing dishes to make rent was about to become one of the most powerful investors in the state. And it all started with a secret I'd been carrying for 3 years. 3 days before that humiliating dinner, I was standing in my small apartment, staring at a letter that had just changed everything. The return address read, Henderson & Associates, Military Investment Recovery. My hands trembled as I read the words I'd been waiting 3 years to see. Settlement approved. Amount, $47.2 million. $47 million. The number felt surreal, like something that belonged to someone else's life, but it was mine. Payment for the patents I'd developed during my time as a communications engineer in the Air Force. Patents that the government had been using without proper compensation. Patents that my lawyer assured me were worth every penny of this settlement. For 3 years, I'd lived like a ghost of my former self, moving back to my hometown of Columbus, Ohio, taking whatever jobs I could find while the legal battle raged in silence. I couldn't tell anyone, not even my family, about the lawsuit. The non-disclosure agreements were ironclad until the settlement was finalized, so I watched as my brother Marcus built his real estate empire. I listened as he bragged about his success at every family gathering. I smiled politely when relatives whispered about poor Raina, who couldn't find her place in the world. They saw the small apartment, the second-hand clothes, the fact that I worked 3 part-time jobs just to pay rent. What they didn't see was the strategic mind that had once coordinated satellite communications for covert military operations. They didn't know about the innovations I'd created that were now protecting soldiers' lives across the globe. I had become invisible in my own family. The irony was almost painful. Marcus loved to tell people how he'd made it with his dozen rental properties and his luxury car dealership. He was worth maybe $2 million on a good day, and here I was, about to receive a settlement that was 23 times his entire net worth. But money wasn't what drove me to keep this secret. It was something deeper, something that went back to our childhood, when Marcus always had to be the golden boy, the one who succeeded at everything. He'd spent our entire lives making me feel small, and now I had the power to change everything. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my safe. In 72 hours, the money would be transferred. In 72 hours, I would begin the most satisfying transformation of my life. But first, I had to survive that dinner. The Grandview restaurant was Marcus's choice, of course. The kind of place where entrees cost more than I pretended to make in a week. He'd specifically chosen it to impress his fiancée Victoria's parents, old money from Connecticut who owned a chain of boutique hotels. I arrived in my best outfit, which honestly wasn't saying much. A simple black dress I'd bought at a thrift store, paired with the only nice shoes I owned. I'd learned to carry myself with quiet dignity, even when everything I wore screamed struggling veteran. Victoria's parents, the Ashfords, were exactly what I expected. Polished, polite, and possessed of that particular brand of wealth that never needs to announce itself. Mrs. Ashford wore pearls that probably cost more than my car, while Mr. Ashford had the kind of confident bearing that comes from generations of financial security. Marcus was in his element, playing the successful entrepreneur role to perfection. His suit was custom-tailored, his watch was a Rolex, and his smile was the practiced expression of someone who'd convinced himself his own press was true. "So, Raina," Mrs. Ashford said as we waited for our appetizers, "Marcus tells us you served in the military. That must have been quite an experience." Before I could answer, Marcus jumped in. "Oh, Raina was in the Air Force. Communication stuff. She was good at it too. But you know how it is. Military skills don't always translate to the real world." The condescension in his voice was thick enough to cut with a knife. I felt that familiar tightness in my chest, The same feeling I'd had as a child when he'd dismiss my accomplishments in front of our parents. "What kind of communications work?" Mr. Ashford asked, genuinely curious. I opened my mouth to explain, but Marcus cut me off again. "Technical stuff. Radios, computers. Nothing too complex, but she was dedicated." He turned to me with that patronizing smile. "Isn't that right, Ray?" The nickname made my skin crawl. Only he called me that, and only when he wanted to make me feel small. "Actually," I began. "The problem," Marcus continued, "is that Raina's been having trouble adjusting since she got out. 3 years now, and she's still trying to find her footing. Some people just aren't cut out for the business world, you know?" Victoria looked uncomfortable. The Ashfords exchanged a glance that I couldn't quite read, and I felt something inside me start to crack. "I'm managing fine," I said quietly. "Oh, come on." Marcus laughed. "Ray, you're working 3 jobs just to afford that tiny apartment. There's no shame in struggling. We've all been there. Well, maybe not all of us," he added with a meaningful look at the Ashfords. The words hit like physical blows, not because they weren't true on the surface, but because of the way he said them. Like I was a failure. Like my service meant nothing. Like the sacrifices I'd made for my country were just a detour on the road to inevitable disappointment. Mrs. Ashford cleared her throat delicately. "Well, I'm sure things will turn around soon." It was meant to be kind, but it stung just the same, because in that moment, I realized how I must look to them. The pity case. The family member you invite to dinner out of obligation, not affection. When the check came, Marcus made a great show of grabbing it. "Don't worry about it, Ray. I've got this one." And there it was. The final humiliation. $47 million was sitting in legal limbo, waiting to become mine, and I had to sit there and let my brother pay for my dinner like I was some kind of charity case. I thanked him quietly, kissed everyone goodbye, and walked to my beat-up Honda Civic in the parking lot. As I sat in the driver's seat, watching Marcus help Victoria into his BMW, I made a decision. I wasn't just going to take this money and disappear. I was going to make them see exactly who I really was, not with cruelty or revenge, but with something much more powerful. I was going to make them see the truth. The next morning, I called my lawyer, David Harrison. He'd been handling my case for 3 years with the kind of professional discretion that came from dealing with high-stakes military settlements. When I told him what I wanted to do, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Raina, are you absolutely sure about this? We could handle the investment quietly. You don't have to make it public." "I'm sure," I said, standing in my tiny kitchen with its chipped countertops and ancient refrigerator. "How quickly can we move?" "The settlement clears tomorrow. If you're serious about this investment strategy, I can have everything ready by Friday." Friday. 2 days away. 2 days until my life changed forever. What about the bank meeting? I've already reached out to Robert Chen at First National. He's intrigued by the proposal. A $40 million investment in community development and veteran support programs. He'll take that meeting. $40 million. I was keeping $7 million for myself. More money than I could spend in several lifetimes. But the rest? The rest was going to do something meaningful. Something that would honor not just my service, but the service of every veteran who'd come home to find the world didn't quite know what to do with them. "Schedule it for Friday afternoon," I said. 3 o'clock. "Raina," David's voice was gentle. "Are you doing this for the right reasons?" I thought about Marcus's smile, about the way the Ashfords had looked at me, about 3 years of being invisible, of being dismissed, of being treated like a failure by people who had no idea what I'd accomplished. "I'm doing this because it's time for the truth," I said. Friday morning, I woke up feeling like a different person. Not because anything had changed on the outside. I was still in the same small apartment, still surrounded by the same modest belongings. But inside, everything was different. The settlement had cleared at midnight. $47.2 million was now sitting in my account, earning interest by the minute. I was, quite literally, one of the wealthiest people in Columbus. But I didn't rush out to buy designer clothes or a luxury car. Instead, I did something much more meaningful. I called my old unit. "Captain Morrison?" The voice on the other end was surprised but pleased. "Raina Blake. How are you, soldier?" "I'm good, sir. Really good. I was calling because I wanted to let you know. That patent settlement came through. All of it." There was a whistle of amazement. "Jesus, Blake. How much?" "Enough to make a difference. I wanted to ask, do you still have contact information for the families we lost in that convoy attack in Afghanistan? 3 years ago, we'd lost 6 soldiers when their convoy hit an IED. The communication system that failed them, the system I'd spent months trying to fix, was part of what had driven me to develop my innovations in the first place. Their deaths had haunted me, motivated me, changed me. I do, Captain Morrison said slowly. What are you thinking? I'm thinking their families deserve better than a flag and a thank you letter. I'm thinking about education funds, mortgage assistance, long-term support, real support. There was silence on the other end, then, Blake, you always were the best of us. Yes, I'll get you that information. After I hung up, I sat in my apartment and planned, not just for the bank meeting, but for everything that would come after. The foundation I would establish, the programs I would fund, the quiet revolution I was about to begin. Then, at 2 o'clock, I got ready for the most important meeting of my life. First National Bank's downtown headquarters was a monument to financial power. 30 stories of glass and steel reaching toward the sky, home to some of the most important financial decisions in the state. I'd driven past it countless times over the past 3 years, never imagining I'd one day walk through its doors as anything other than someone asking for a loan. Today, I was walking in as an equal. I'd chosen my outfit carefully. Not the expensive power suit of someone trying to prove something, but the simple elegance of someone who didn't need to. Navy blue blazer, white blouse, clean lines, professional but understated. The receptionist directed me to the executive floor, where David was already waiting. He smiled when he saw me, and I could see the pride in his eyes. He'd worked this case for 3 years, fighting the government bureaucracy every step of the way. This moment belonged to both of us. Ready? He asked. I've been ready for 3 years. Robert Chen's office was exactly what I'd expected. Corner windows overlooking the city, awards and photographs covering the walls, a mahogany desk that probably cost more than most people's cars. Chen himself was younger than I'd anticipated, maybe 45, with the kind of sharp intelligence that made him one of the most respected bank presidents in the Midwest. Miss Blake? He said, standing to shake my hand. David's told me about your proposal. I have to say, it's not every day someone walks in here looking to invest $40 million in community development. It's not every day someone gets the chance to, I replied. We sat down, and I began to explain my vision. Not just the money, but the purpose behind it. The veteran support programs, the small business incubation center, the housing development for military families, the scholarship fund for children of fallen soldiers. Chen listened intently, asking smart questions, probing the details. This wasn't charity, I explained. This was investment, strategic, long-term investment in the community that had supported me, even when I couldn't support myself. The returns won't be immediate, I said, but they'll be measurable. Lower veteran unemployment, increased home ownership, better educational outcomes, and yes, eventually financial returns as well. Where did this come from? Chen asked finally. This level of strategic thinking? I smiled. 8 years coordinating communications for special operations. You learn to think systematically when people's lives depend on it. There was a moment of silence as that sank in. Then Chen leaned back in his chair and smiled. Ms. Blake, I think we're going to do great things together. That's when he asked the question that would change everything. I don't suppose you'd be interested in a more formal partnership? We've been looking for someone with your background to help us develop our Veteran Services Division, someone who understands both the military mindset and strategic investment. A partnership with First National Bank, not just as an investor, but as a leader. What exactly are you proposing? I asked. Co-director of our new Community Investment Division. Salary, equity, full decision-making authority over veteran-focused programs. You'd essentially be running a $40 million investment fund with the full backing of the bank. I thought about my brother's words, about struggling veterans who couldn't adapt to civilian life, about being the family disappointment. I accept, I said. That evening, I drove back to my apartment with a head full of plans and a heart full of something I hadn't felt in years, genuine excitement about the future. I was no longer just Raina Blake, struggling veteran. I was Raina Blake, partner at First National Bank, director of a $40 million investment fund, an architect of programs that would change lives across the state. But first, I had a phone call to make. Marcus, it's Raina. Listen, Victoria's parents seemed really nice the other night. I was wondering if you'd all like to have dinner tomorrow. My treat this time. There was surprise in his voice. Ray, you don't have to do that. I know money's tight for you. Actually, I've had a change in circumstances. Would the Grandview work? I'd like to reserve the private dining room. A pause. The private dining room? That's really expensive. I'll handle it. 8 o'clock? Sure. But Ray, are you okay? You sound different. I'm better than okay, Marcus. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Saturday evening, I arrived at the Grandview 30 minutes early. I'd made special arrangements with the manager, a former Army sergeant who'd been thrilled to help when I explained what I was planning. The private dining room was perfect, elegant, intimate, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights. I'd also invited someone special to join us. Someone whose presence would make this evening unforgettable. Marcus, Victoria, and her parents arrived precisely at 8. They looked around the private dining room with obvious confusion. This wasn't the kind of space you just reserved on a whim. This was the kind of room that required serious money and significant advance planning. Raina, Mrs. Ashford said carefully, this is lovely, but it must be terribly expensive. Don't worry about it, I said with a smile. I can afford it. We'd just been seated when Robert Chen arrived, exactly as planned. He was dressed casually, but expensively, carrying himself with the quiet confidence that came from being one of the most powerful men in the city's financial sector. Sorry I'm late, he said, walking directly to me. The contracts took longer to finalize than expected. Marcus looked confused. I'm sorry. Who are you? Chen extended his hand. Robert Chen, president of First National Bank. You must be Marcus. Raina's told me so much about you. The silence that followed was profound. Victoria's parents exchanged glances, suddenly realizing they were in the presence of serious financial power. Marcus looked like he'd been hit with a brick. I'm sorry, Marcus said slowly, but how do you know my sister? Chen smiled and looked at me. Should I tell them, partner, or would you like to? Partner. The word hung in the air like a revelation. I stood up, feeling every eye in the room on me. This was the moment I'd been planning for days, dreaming about for years. 3 years ago, I began. When I left the Air Force, I filed a lawsuit against the Department of Defense for unauthorized use of communications technology I'd developed, technology that's now protecting soldiers' lives around the world. Marcus's face had gone completely blank. Yesterday, that lawsuit was settled for $47.2 million. Mrs. Ashford gasped audibly. Mr. Ashford leaned forward in his chair. Victoria's mouth fell open. $40 million of that money is now being invested in community development programs through First National Bank, where I've just been named co-director of the Community Investment Division. We're launching the largest veteran support initiative in the state's history. I turned to Marcus, who looked like he was struggling to process what he was hearing. The woman you thought was washing dishes to make rent? She just became one of the largest private investors in Ohio. The family disappointment who couldn't adapt to civilian life? She's about to change the lives of thousands of veterans across the state. Chen nodded approvingly. Raina's strategic vision and military background make her uniquely qualified to lead these initiatives. We expect her programs to become a model for veteran support nationwide. But, Marcus stammered, but you work 3 jobs. You live in that tiny apartment. You drive that old car. I chose to live that way, I said gently. I couldn't discuss the lawsuit while it was pending, and I wanted to understand what it was really like for veterans coming home to nothing. How could I design programs to help them if I didn't understand their struggles? The truth of it settled over the room like a warm blanket. For 3 years, I hadn't been struggling. I'd been researching, learning, preparing to make a difference. The patents you developed, Mr. Ashford said, his voice filled with respect. What do they do? Encrypted satellite communication systems for forward operating bases, real-time intelligence coordination networks, battlefield communication protocols that have reduced casualty rates by 37% in the past 2 years. Chen leaned forward. The Pentagon has described Raina's innovations as some of the most significant advances in military communications technology in decades. Victoria found her voice first. Raina, this is incredible. You've been carrying this secret for 3 years. The hardest part, I said, looking directly at Marcus, wasn't keeping the secret. It was listening to people I love tell me I was a failure, when I knew I was about to change the world. Marcus's eyes filled with tears. Ray, I had no idea. The things I said were based on what you could see, I said gently. I don't blame you for that. But I hope now you understand that sometimes the people we underestimate are the ones preparing to surprise us the most. Dinner that night was unlike any meal our family had ever shared. The conversation flowed from my military service to my business plans, from the technology I'd developed to the lives I hoped to change. Mr. and Mrs. Ashford peppered me with questions about investment strategy and community development. Victoria wanted to know about my time in Afghanistan. And Marcus just listened, really listened, maybe for the first time in our lives. As the evening wound down, Chen excused himself, but not before making one final announcement that left everyone speechless. Before I go, he said, I wanted you all to know that the board has approved a rather unusual arrangement. Given the significance of Raina's investment and the scope of her vision, First National will be naming our new downtown community center after her. The Blake Center for Veteran Excellence will serve as the headquarters for all of our veteran support programs. After he left, we sat in the quiet elegance of the private dining room, the city lights twinkling beyond the windows. Ray, Marcus said finally, I owe you the biggest apology of my life. No, I said, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. You don't owe me anything. You've always been protective of this family, always wanting us to succeed. I understand that. But the way I talked about you, the way I made you feel, made me stronger, I said truthfully. Made me more determined to prove that service members aren't broken when we come home. We're just getting started. Mrs. Ashford wiped tears from her eyes. My dear, you've shown us something extraordinary tonight. Not just your success, but your grace. As we prepared to leave, Marcus pulled me aside. I keep thinking about all those times I tried to help you, he said. Offering to lend you money, trying to get you interviews at my company. You must have thought I was such an idiot. I laughed, surprising us both. Marcus, you thought you were helping your struggling little sister. That's not idiotic. That's love. But you didn't need help. You were planning this whole thing. I needed something more important than help, I said. I needed to remember who I was fighting for. Every time you tried to take care of me, every time you worried about my future, you reminded me that this wasn't just about money. It was about proving that veterans deserve respect, deserve recognition, deserve a chance to contribute. He hugged me then. Really hugged me, like he hadn't since we were kids. I'm so proud of you, he whispered. I'm proud to be your brother. 6 months later, I was standing in the main hall of the Blake Center for Veteran Excellence, watching as 24 veterans received their certificates from our job training program. The building hummed with activity. Employment counselors meeting with clients, small business workshops in session, children from military families participating in our after-school programs. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the construction site across the street where our affordable housing development was taking shape. Blake Gardens would provide homes for 50 military families, with built-in support services and community spaces designed specifically for veterans transitioning to civilian life. Marcus walked up beside me, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the center's cafe, a social enterprise run entirely by veteran entrepreneurs. Pretty amazing view, he said, handing me a cup. It's everything I dreamed it would be, I agreed. You know what the best part is? He asked. What's that? You didn't do this to prove anything to me, or to Victoria's parents, or to anyone else. You did it because it was right. I thought about that night at the Grandview, about the moment when Robert Chen called me his partner, about the look on everyone's faces when they realized who I really was. The revelation wasn't for them, I said finally. It was for me. I needed to stop hiding. I needed to stop letting other people's perceptions define me. Marcus nodded. And now, I looked around at the center buzzing with activity, at the veterans finding new purpose, at the families getting second chances. My phone buzzed with a text from Chen about our upcoming presentation to the Pentagon, where our programs were being considered for national implementation. Now, I said, I'm exactly who I was always meant to be. As if on cue, a group of kids ran past us, heading to the playground outside. Their laughter echoed through the building, mixing with the sounds of productive activity, of lives being rebuilt, of futures being secured. 3 years ago, I'd been the family disappointment who couldn't adapt to civilian life. Today, I was changing the way America treats its veterans, one program at a time, one life at a time. The woman they'd underestimated had become exactly who she was meant to be all along, and this was just the beginning.